we are now recording. Welcome to the Saturday morning service. Today is December 25th, and I welcome all of you. And we are very fortunate today in that Rabbi Stephen is going to be leading a service for us this morning on darkness. Rabbi Steve, did you want to do a little talk before we get to the prayer list, or did you want to just?
Yeah, let's get started. First of all, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I used to laugh because people get upset at being wished Merry Christmas, and my feeling was always that just because it isn't my holiday doesn't mean I should have a lousy day. So I intend to have a Merry Christmas, even though it's not my holiday. I'm just not going to do anything to celebrate the holiday, though I am Jewish, so it's Chinese food and maybe a movie. So we'll see how that all goes. I know there are several articles about Jews and Chinese food. Part of it may be because everything was cut up so small you could sneak in on kosher things without paying attention, but again, what was open on the holidays was an interesting thing.
Restaurants.
And I am part of that generation that grew up in a house where there was a wonderful rabbi in California by the name of Harold Schulweis. And he observed that my grandparents' generation, I'm in my 70s, my grandparents' generation knew they were Jewish. Some of them migrated here, and my dad, being first generation, kind of had a sense of being Jewish, but didn't know what it meant to be American. So they were struggling to be Americans. So I had one of those living rooms where right next to the menorah was the Christmas tree. And when I asked my mother why we had a Christmas tree, her answer, which I don't really believe, I don't think I ever got a straight answer to that, was because I wanted one. I never realized I was quite that powerful in the house in which I grew up. But it was that struggle because there was something about the tree and being American. And then he observed that, come our generation, our kids, and where we go from there, is they all know how to be Americans. Now we have to teach them how to be Jewish. And so the whole thing has flipped from going across the thing. So I have no trouble with being wished Merry Christmas. And in fact, it's almost awkward that there are a couple of people I've run into here in Rochester who know I'm a rabbi and things, and so I wish them Merry Christmas, and they wish me back Happy Hanukkah, and I have to say, it was 2 weeks ago, and, but I bite my tongue because I know they're trying to be polite and nice about it. So that's there. This is an interesting time of year. If we look, and welcome everybody. If we look at winter holidays seem to share an interesting theme, especially right around now, because those of us in the Northern Hemisphere and somewhat north in the Northern Hemisphere, we are at the time of year when days are the shortest and nights are the longest. And in fact, if you go far enough north, days are non-existent, and night is ongoing. Though I meet with a congregation in El Salvador in the afternoon, and they don't understand any of this because the time stays about the same all year long. And to talk about solstice and equinox and stuff
doesn't mean anything.
They don't comprehend. They don't comprehend. But all of these holidays seem to celebrate light. That Christmas is a celebration of light. Hanukkah is the celebration of light. Diwali is the celebration of light. This is all about light and the wonder of light. And I came across something in Torah class at my home synagogue during Hanukkah that made me think of this time of year in a different way, and I want to explore that with you today. For the last several weeks, I have running through my head the opening words of Simon and Garfunkel's Sounds of Silence. I have, as many of us do, seasonal affective disorder. The days are so short, it's dark when I get up, it's dark when I go to sleep. My mood goes through the floor. And I do much better in sunlight than I do in darkness. And the opening line of Sounds of Silence is, "Hello, darkness, my old friend." And I don't know how many of us consider darkness our friend. And I want to celebrate today, not light. I want to celebrate where we are. I want to celebrate darkness. And it's difficult. There is something about language and culture that leans toward light. Even in dark-skinned communities, there is something about being lighter skinned that is seen to be higher up. In African communities, light-skinned people are seen to be better than dark-skinned people. In India, the upper-class women bleach their skin. There's something about lightness. The word for wisdom, enlightenment. When we talked about going out and helping people in places that needed to be elevated socially, we talked about going to the dark continent and dark places. Dark places are somehow seen as very negative. Our language is prejudice against darkness. And so many words associated with dark are negative, and so many words associated with light are positive. And yet darkness is a vital part of life. Bruce was speaking in Donuts last week, or one of the rooms after the session, about even creation coming out of darkness. And I think, as I recall your words, you said something disparaging about the dark from which light emerged in that kind of sense. So what I want to do today is start us off in small groups. There aren't a lot of us this week, so I hope you'll all go to groups, but I will be here for anybody who doesn't want to. And what I would like us to share are positive associations with dark. Where is darkness your friend? Where are those places where dark is a positive? Why do we need dark? Anybody who's a photographer knows that the dark room is a good place. And anybody who is a kid trying to go to sleep knows that a dark room is a terrible place. So what I'd like us to do is to take maybe 8 minutes so that you have some time to talk, a little time to think, because this question comes out of left field, and to share with your group positive images of darkness. And then please come back and share what your group has come up with. Somebody in each group be responsible for reporting back your findings. I would appreciate it greatly. Are we clear? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, the rooms are now open, and you should get a notification to hop on in.
I am going to decline mine. Okay, we got about 3 rooms. Good.
Good joining.
All right. Okay. Well, they all went,
Yeah,
except for people who aren't here.
you did good.
Good. All right. Now, we'll see what they come up with. I don't really have, I have a couple of things, but I don't really have a lot to go with it. So hopefully we will fill the day. And after we have this conversation, we'll deal with the sick list.
Yeah, that's a good plan. I know we have quite a few people on there, so.
Yeah. The list is longer than the crowd. And we already have 4 things in chat that I haven't even seen yet. So let's see what's on chat.
Yeah, I had posted that I'm much more aware of this bias in the English language. We hired a African American, guy for our team at work, and it's a very small company, and IT is just notoriously so white, right? And when we hired this guy on, he's a fantastic programmer, he's really smart, and I started to notice things like, oh, I went to I saw this movie on Netflix, and it was really dark, and I started thinking
Yeah,
about that, and it wasn't something that I ever really thought about in that context, but it suddenly became pushed to the forefront because I suddenly realized that when you're saying something is dark,
right.
and you
All
have
that language.
you have a person of color standing right next to you, and you realize, wow, it never occurred to me that our language is so tremendously
That's
biased.
why I wanted Afia to be here today to
Yeah.
bring in some perspective. Yeah, the article that we looked at a couple of weeks ago started with going to a Hanukkah program in Massachusetts, and the song was written by a Yemenite, so a dark-skinned Jew,
Mhm.
and it's Banu Choshech Ligaresh. We have gathered here for Hanukkah to push away the darkness. You
Yeah,
know,
and and it's funny that a lot of those things didn't really filter into my brain until we hired my coworker. And for me it's kind of fascinating because I grew up sailing around the South Pacific on a sailboat, and so we went to a lot of countries where the predominant population isn't white, right?
mhm.
Or the indigenous people there aren't white, and it just never really, I just, as a kid, I just saw them as people, and it didn't really occur to me how biased the language was until
Is there a timer on the group or some way you're keeping track of
yeah,
stuff?
I have a timer running on my clock.
Okay,
We have 3 minutes 38 seconds
okay,
until I
that's fine.
call
Yeah,
him back.
yeah, but it's the same thing again with the male language and just getting away from all the man and human and all that kind of stuff. You know, uh, I mean, the beautiful thing is, unfortunately, now it becomes planetary. Better than human in Hebrew, Adam, the first person, is connected to Adamah, which is the ground.
Right.
And I mean, we could be a groundling, but we are our earthlings. But earthling kind of ends up being planetary as opposed to being tied to the ground in that sense.
Right.
Uh, In fact, I never even thought about using groundling until this morning, and the only place I've heard the word groundlings before was it was a comedy group at one point.
Well,
Hi,
it'll
Rose. Good morning.
good morning, Rose.
You're muted.
You're muted. I think it would be very interesting to see how language evolves if we ever do get into the position where we are actually capable of having interstellar travel, and we meet up with folks out there.
Though
Uh,
then again, I saw an interesting observation this week. We do such a good job of getting along with each other. What makes us think we're going to get along with anybody who comes from somewhere else?
well, that was one of the things that I think Stephen Hawking mentioned this caution when he was alive, that we're out there sending radio signals out into space going, hey yo, we're here. But the one danger is that anybody who's got the technology to get over here right now is going to be much more powerful than us, and so we better darn well hope
That
that
they're friendly.
they're friendly and that they don't want to eat humans as snacks.
I love that one. What was was it Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, where it was to serve humanity was their guidebook, and everybody was happy with that, and it turned out to be a cookbook.
Let's have a snack. Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah. All right, so they'll be coming back soon. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, be curious to see what they come up with. It's like when you're sitting in front of the fireplace, you really don't want the fireplace to light the room up like it's daylight. And when we light our Hanukkah candles, we really don't want the room to light up like light bulbs. So we'll see
Yeah.
what people come up with.
And when I light Hanukkah candles, I want to make sure that my dog isn't anywhere near the coffee table.
Uh-huh.
The little tail goes back and
Yes,
forth.
yes. We try for higher counters because of that. Just about ready. How much we got?
Yeah, we got about 40 seconds, and then I'll push the button to call people back. So
Good. I'll be interested to see what we come up with. How are you this morning?
Morning.
How you be?
I'm sorry.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Sorry, I'm late. Good.
you were feeding the animals,
Yeah.
which I appreciate.
Had an uncooperative cockatoo.
Uh-huh.
Okay, all right. I'm calling the groups back here.
Okay.
They have a minute to kind of wrap up. Some of them will start coming back right away, but
Good.
the rooms will automatically close in about 50 seconds in here.
I'm happy that just about everybody went. Welcome back.
Thank you. Mm.
Okay, we've got about 10 seconds left, and then the whole batch should come back.
Okay. We'll see where we go. Here they come.
To sum it up for everybody.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right. I hope your discussions were good. I would love to hear from different people as to what you came up with in your groups. If anybody would like to report from their group, please.
I'll report. So we had some interesting and so really good positives in terms of sleeping and dreaming, providing some comfort and peace, because it sort of reduces the distractions around us, which sort of lowers the sensory input, which can be calming.
Okay.
And we had some really interesting ones. Someone in our group had been studying organisms in bogs. And I've heard the same about really dark, deep down at the bottom of the ocean. And organisms that thrive in the dark, that are crucial for life in these areas. And so, something that's very necessary. We had the idea that dark is where life happens and where light comes from. And so it provides the medium. Darkness provides the medium for light.
Okay.
So those were our main ones.
That's lovely. Very lovely.
Okay, I'll do group 5. I think we were group 5. We had a contrast. We had some of our group are very rural, so they have beautiful dark skies full of stars every night. And we touched on the fact that in actual fact, only in the darkness can you see the magnificence of the rest of the universe. So that's very, very inspiring. Makes you think of God and creation and things like that. We also talked about the fact that the darkness isn't really dark anyway. That even in darkness there's some light. And then I brought up about perhaps the darkness is more of a darkness of the soul more than the physical. So it's also a darkness in that you feel lost, which is sort of bleakness in that sense. I think that's about all we covered.
Yeah, and also that when we make love, which is the beginning of life, we usually want to make it. We want to make love in the dark, maybe not totally dark, but usually we don't want to make love in the bright lights. We want to turn the lights down and have it romantic and have the beginning of life.
Okay.
Well, that's the other thing we touched on, was that according to the Genesis version, then the darkness came before the light. So we should revere that as actually being closer to God than the creations that came after that. So that was another thought.
Okay. Other groups? It's 2 out of 5.
We also talked about the dark sky and the stars and how that was it brings a sense of awe when you can actually see the vastness of the universe. But we also got into a lot of discussion about the shadow and dark, what we conventionally refer to as dark music, what some people associate with kind of depressing, dark artistic creations that paradoxically makes us feel better. Like listening to what some people will call depressing music actually makes people feel better.
Okay.
Like blues.
That was a
Yeah.
nice,
Yeah.
a nice flip there at the end. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good.
Is that because you feel better because you realize someone's more depressed than you are?
Sometimes.
or that your feelings are validated.
Yeah, and there was a lot of like all the themes of darkness, being in the dark and shutting out the exterior, the dark music, the exploring your shadow side. It's all about going inward rather than outward, so that when you're in the bright light, you're seeing the external world, but when you're in the darkness, you're looking at yourself, really. Like there's a lot of introspection in the dark.
Okay. So being in the dark allows you, not just in the sky, but in yourself or in other kinds of exploration, to see things that you can't see in the light.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Isn't there a phrase, somebody is kept in the dark?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, it means you're out of the loop.
Negative language.
Yeah.
We could have come up with 1,000 things of darkness being negative. That's an easy one. Okay. Other groups?
And I'm going to need help because I had to come in and out of our group because I was doing something. But the first thing that comes to mind is that in darkness, there's a crack in everything, right? The Leonard Cohen song, that's how light gets in. So we talked about the containment of darkness, how darkness can contain tremendous light and give it form. And also, well, I think everybody's talking about the image of darkness as the dark night of the soul, depression, conflict, whatever we're going through. But the idea that it's not enduring, it extends slowly into light. So there's a sense of urgency, clarity, hope, but not without difficulty and struggle. Now that I'm just elaborating, but Betsy, do you want to add something? I missed some of the.
Well, we were talking also about the darkness helps you sleep. You need rest because physiologically, for some reason, we have this need for rest. It's kind of a strange thing. Nobody really knows what happens to our brains when we sleep. Yeah, in order to be better able to get into sleeping, you need to, one of the things they suggest is to dim the lights. Don't have bright lights on when you're getting ready to go to bed.
Mhm. Bruce, did I see your hand up?
Yeah. I was in a breakout session with Moja, and he's in Africa, and I'm in Washington. I'm almost on the Canadian border, so I mean, it's like we got different conditions going on here, and so we were talking about. I did go to Thailand once, which was close as I've been to the equator, and there's amazing things that goes on with shadows and light. Like at the equator, the sun goes down, bam, at 6 o'clock. There's no sunset. There's no dusk, because that's what happens at the equator. And then the same thing in the morning, it goes from, the sun comes up at 6 o'clock, bam, it goes from darkness to light, and there's, 12 hours of darkness.
Wow.
And and even the moon is totally different. And that when I was in Thailand, I realized the difference between heat stroke and sunstroke, and that, heat stroke is just when you get overheated, of course, but I never really understood what sunstroke was. But then, the sun is so intense, at or near the equator, it literally can fry your brain. I mean, I had to stay in the shadows just because then, so you really appreciate the shadows, every bit of shadow you can get when you're in such intense conditions. And so, and that, we had talked about the fact that in all of our evolutionary history, I mean, the darkness was really feared because obviously it was a survival aspect, involved. And so, unfortunately, the darkness really got, a bad rap because of our survival evolutionary experience. And so we've really had to make an effort to find the benefits in darkness. And then all these other ideas that people are talking about, how, the darkness reveals yourself. I really like that. That's really cool. That when you're in darkness, all you see is yourself. And that's, that in itself can be very frightening.
Yeah. One of the things also is that the idea of light and dark is only relevant because we have a sense of sight. And blind people, to try to describe to somebody who was blind from birth the difference between dark and light is a whole nother.
Well, it's interesting that we have a third eye. Our brain, can really depends a lot on light and darkness, and that our brain through our third eye can sense the darkness, and it, is responsible for a lot of our whatever you call those cycles. So that's kind of interesting.
The original article that got me thinking. Anybody else want to reflect on their group before I move us a little forward? I thank you, and I thank you for embracing the question. The original article was written by a rabbi whose child goes to a Jewish school in Massachusetts. It is a multi-ethnic Jewish school because the Jewish community has everything in it that you can think of, though we don't tend to think of it necessarily that way, but it is. And a Yemenite woman, a dark-skinned Jew, wrote a Hanukkah song that was entitled Banu Choshech L'Garesh. We have come the darkness to expel. And so, darkness is the enemy, and we have come to push it out. And yet here we have talked about some really beautiful images of where darkness is important. Again, darkness allows us to see the night sky. When you are laying in the dark watching the fireplace. I don't know about you, but I know an awful lot of people are just fascinated watching that fire dance around. You want to be in the dark for that, so that the fire appreciates that. On Hanukkah, you turn off the lights and you light your 8 little candles. On the brightest night, there's 9 candles going. You don't want those 9 candles to be as bright as a 300-watt light bulb. There's something about just the piercing of the darkness as opposed to the conquest of the darkness that we celebrate. And yet, in our language, the forces of light are out to overcome the forces of darkness. Enlightenment overcomes the darkness of ignorance. Civilization against the darkness of the lack of, all of these kinds of images that we have that by and large we are caught with that. Alex and I were talking, and she was talking about the interesting sensitivity that came up for her. You want to share that rather than me telling your story?
Yeah. In the last couple of years, I work for a very small company that does IT stuff, and IT tends to be tremendously populated by, it's very white. And we recently, in the last couple of years, hired a gentleman who's African American, and he's tremendously talented and super smart. And one of the things that I noticed when I talk about things like, oh, hey, how was your weekend or whatever? And, oh, well, we watched Netflix and it was this really dark movie. And, I suddenly started becoming very aware of how biased our English language is. And, it was something that I never really thought of before, even though, like Bruce, I've traveled, I've seen how the light and dark plays differently near the equator. We spent 2 years sailing around the South Pacific on a sailboat. And, many of the countries that we visited, the predominant indigenous people were not white. And I never looked at those people as anything other than people because, I was a child. And I never really gave a whole lot of thought to just how biased our language is against dark colors, dark things. I'm in a black mood, that was a dark movie. And those kinds of things, I was never aware until I started working with somebody and started thinking about how my words might be taken. And it really gave me a new perspective.
Yeah.
Meg has her hand up. Let's go to Meg.
I'm curious, and I don't know enough about other languages, but are other languages the same way? Like what triggered this was Steve using the word enlightenment for wisdom. Now, anybody that knows other languages, do they have any ideas on, are they as dark about darkness as English?
Any linguists among us? It's a great question. We'll have to look into that. I don't know if that's just an English or a Western kind of thing, because a lot of our language comes out of Europe again, too, and Europe is the light against the dark, so I'm not sure. I honestly don't know.
The same goes on with the left hand and the right hand. The right hand is dextral and the left hand is sinistral. Those lefties, those left people, you gotta, and of course, there's reasons that the left hand was considered to be negative, which I'll leave that to your imagination. But the right hand, everybody's right-handed, right? But so there's that same evolutionary bias that has crept in from, millions of years of evolution, about darkness is threatening and the left hand is evil and all that kind of stuff, and it still affects us to this day.
Yeah. But then left wing and right wing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's dualism. It's a dualistic. I don't know if it's just Western thought, but certainly entrenched in Western thought. And so for us, I think resolving conflict, resolving dualism becomes important spiritually, psychologically, for peace of mind.
And yet, I think when I think of, if I had written the book, The Gift of the Jews, what is remarkable about being Jewish is that we don't force ourselves to solve dualistic problems, that we embrace both and let the opposites fight against each other in a healthy way. In that sense. Reed, I see your hand is up, and then Carol, I see you.
Carol, yep.
Well, you just took a phrase that I was going to use, which is years ago, an astrologer told me, forget the either or and go for the both and I think in terms of the shadow self, that part of our self that is dark that we don't want to face, and the idea that it's the combination of the two that is what makes us whole. I mean, that if we deny the dark, then we're only looking at part of life and part of ourselves also. And so I think it's something that is educational to explore, to look into ourselves and deal with that part of ourselves that we don't really want to deal with, basically, I guess. So
Thank you.
that's the shadow self to me.
To embrace your whole self.
Yeah.
You can't deny any part of it.
Right.
Carol.
All life germinates in the dark. You cannot plant in the light. Dark is necessary for growth, and it's necessary for our growth as well as for plant growth. And there is so much richness and potentiality in the dark, and it is absolutely nuts to try to cut it off.
Thank you. That's exactly where I was going to go next. The other two images that came out of the article was the whole notion that everything that grows begins in the dark. So all of plant life and all of plant growth is underground, much more than it is above ground in the dark. And human beings also grow in the dark and only emerge into the light when we are born. And so these things, also came into appreciating the positive side of darkness. Jeff.
Yes,
Even the universe started in the dark. In the Bible, it says it was evening and then it was morning the first day.
Yes. Yeah, our day starts at nighttime.
Yeah. I also understand darkness as having hatred in your heart, or envy, and so sort of other things. So like to bring light to someone, maybe you have like to counsel him so that he can be a good person in the other way.
Let me ask you, because your native language is African, is an African language.
Yes.
Does your language possess that same prejudice toward light over dark for positive and negative?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, darkness can be like someone having hatred in his heart or envy. Then
Thank you.
There's 2 points I'd like to make. One was, you might find this interesting. We're talking about duality, and as you say, the Jewish faith is embrace both. You may not have heard that in Buddhism, there's an aspiration to actually free yourself of the pairs of opposites, as they're called. This is considered a major obstacle intellectually for people on the path. The other thing that I was thinking about is that we obviously have a deep genetic memory that goes back thousands of years of things that are around in the dark that might eat us, so hence the campfire will keep the animals away. Those saber-toothed tigers are always floating around in our consciousness somewhere. Is there a relationship between this and this? This is a bit bold and rude in one sense. For the Jewish people, is there any relationship with this and the Holocaust and what that means to the Jewish people?
That's a big question, but it's universal because Jews aren't the only ones who experienced annihilation. So it's a universal question. I'm glad you brought up the concept of the religion of Buddhism because it does seek to go through the darkness, to understand suffering. It begins with that is the beginning point, and how to move out of suffering. So resolution of conflict, I wouldn't label it Jewish or non-Jewish, this is human, profoundly human and more psychological.
Yeah.
It's I think all religions are interested in ameliorating suffering and coming to terms with, our condition, the human condition, which, is limited, finite, as some of us have studied, and coming to terms with that is potent. So in Buddhism, clearly the practice of meditation, the committed practice of meditation, day in, day out, and community and Sangha, kind of some of the things we do in this group, and I think in certain religious practices and groups. So it's a process, it's a deep, ongoing process. And again, we come back to our own time now, which is, my God, this pandemic is facing us with enormous challenges with regard to death and grief. And, how do we cope with, how do we understand this? I don't know, the last thing I want to say is there's an article in the New York Times about this concept of ambiguous grief. Did anybody catch that article in the New York Times about a couple of weeks ago? Fascinating insight into the process of resolving ambiguity, which I think is conflict. So it's just ambiguous grief. Yeah, interesting concept. Losing people, not knowing how they died, not being able to see them, be close to them, or people who are in our own families who are here, but they're not really present, absent psychologically.
Let me, Jess, I know you're not bashful, so I appreciate it if you would, for those who aren't quick at reading the chat, you were sharing some really interesting stuff there. Would you share it out loud, please?
Sure, thank you. I just, while we were speaking, didn't come up in my mind in the small group, but while we were speaking, I just remembered a story, and it's about the destruction of the planet, and the destruction happens for some odd reason, like a giant falls to the planet, and it's so ginormous that it just elicits this like cataclysmic destruction of the planet. And everyone's freaking out, except for like a few devout people. And they decide to they're like, well, it's gonna come to the end anyway, so we might as well just pray. So they pray calmly in the like field of all this destruction. And who should appear but Lady Kali, who lands on the body of the giant who fell to the planet. And she's described as this completely dark, pure black, completely withered, sort of like an image of some of the things we were talking about earlier that are like the negatives of darkness. But she's described as completely black, but absolutely pure. And she's accompanied by like her little goblins who are like workers, and she sits down on the corpse of this man that fell to the planet and destroyed everything. And just by sitting upon it, she just starts to like absorb. It's almost like a vampiric description. She just sits on the corpse of this giant that's destroying the planet. And just by sitting there, because she's completely black, but absolutely pure, because it's her nature, she absorbs this destruction or devours the destruction. And it describes her goblins also as like these little dark creatures, but they kind of sound like friendly in the story. And that they're all there they won't stop devouring this destruction until it's complete. And then the story describes, the mountains of the New World being made from the bones of the giant that they devoured. So I just kind of reminded me of one of those archetypal stories where darkness or that blackness or that devouring nature is definitely portrayed in like a positive and necessary creative aspect as well. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jess. And I think we're learning that the majority of space is filled with quote unquote dark matter, whatever that is. And I'm curious, we think of dark holes as rather threatening. And since we have no idea where they exit, who knows if that isn't into a new creation on the other side, and that they could be positive as opposed to negative forces. We have no clue as to what's on the other side of all of that as well. But there is a lot to appreciate. I'd like to pause for a moment while we're here and celebrate us as a community and our togetherness. Again, it was really lovely. I think it was 2 weeks ago during Donuts, where we had some wonderful conversation among several people in our group who are facing illness of their own and facing the need for healing. Maybe it was last week or the week before, and felt really comfortable in this safe space that we have created in talking about their concerns openly in ways that they couldn't share elsewhere. We have taken it upon ourselves as a part of our day to spend a little time thinking about sending positive energy and positive thoughts and concern to those in our group and the family members of those in our group who are in need of healing. And I think now is a good time to pause and acknowledge the list of names, give you an opportunity to add any names that you have, and then we'll take our, Alex, if you'll time us out for a minute of meditation at the end, we'll do that. Okay. So who has the list?
Maria has the list.
I've got the list.
Okay, Maria.
So the prayer list for today includes Ken, Joe, Margaret, Alex, Carol, Lee, Eloise and family for their loss of Dave, Eileen and family, Eileen's twin is Eloise, Colleen and family, Donna, who is healing from COVID, Jocelyn, who is needing some pain relief, Betsy Morrow, cousin Amy, Lisa, and for anyone who is feeling COVID stress, and for COVID victims. And if there's anyone else that we can put on the list, who needs us to offer some love and light, you can either put it in the chat or you can say their name out loud for us, so we know that we can also pray for them.
Okay, see Bob Smith and family was added to the chat.
Okay.
Marcia Estes.
I have Dina and Naomi and Erina.
Go ahead and read it to that also.
Okay.
Let us take a moment to take them into our hearts and to feel a sense of community with them and to send forth to them wishes and hopes for as complete a recovery as is humanly possible.
Amen.
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 I'm happy to note that my daughter will be finishing up her treatment here in Rochester next week, and we will be returning home, and I will be seeing you from my familiar surroundings starting next week in the new year. Looking forward to that. I appreciate you taking my subject and running with it today. I hope as we continue through the winter that we will not only bemoan the darkness, but also take some time to celebrate it and to appreciate it in a way that's possible. I don't think we have a formal list of announcements.
Yeah, I have a few. Like always, for those of you who want to hang out, we're going to have obviously a smaller crowd for virtual donuts top of the hour. Maria and I will be here to host. So if any of you wish to hang out and continue the discussion, you're welcome. Also, for those of you who are feeling particularly alone on this day, the Mighty Networks Clubhouse is open, and I'm going to post a link in the chat here. So if those of you who are feeling like you want to have some additional company or chat or whatever, the online community is open. And then I'm going to just go ahead and post Rabbi's regular links for social media, our pen pal James Wilson, who is incarcerated at Susanville Prison, his bonus page, and his handy sheets. Also, just as a reminder, this community does not exist without everyone's financial support. So I've also included the link if those of you are looking to make a year-end donation to Rabbi. The link is in the chat as well.
Someone asked about this article I mentioned, and I'm trying to find it. Yeah, let me just say the article is in the New York Times Magazine of December 12th on ambiguous grief.
There's a lot of information on ambiguous grief out in the world too.
Is that right? Yeah, I think this one woman did all the writing. She was a major, but I don't know who asked the question, and I can't get it on the top of my tongue. So if someone could send me an email who knows, I'm glad to do it. Anyway, but you can Google it. I think the person's last name is Boss, the psychologist or social worker who wrote about it. BOSS, I think.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Steve, very much.
And it was interesting that when I was talking to Brian and getting ready for today, if there was a chance that the subject really didn't take and we had a bunch of time left, what he had suggested was that we explore the subject of grief. So for those of you who find that as a worthy topic for us to look at in the future, please let Brian know that that's a subject that you would find worthy of a Saturday, and he or I will find a way to address it with you, or we'll do it together. I know there are some therapists in our group who have some work with that. I've worked as a hospice chaplain, and others have experiences that would all be helpful in talking about how to deal with our own grief, or as he had suggested for today, how we deal with other people's grief as well when it's before us, because sometimes that's even harder than dealing with our own. So I know those are subjects that are of interest in the future. So we will see where we go with that. But I know that's on at least the back of his mind. So we'll see where we go. In my younger day, I used to have the first word, the middle word, and the last word. I have fortunately outgrown that need. We have about 5 minutes left. And would anybody like to add some final thoughts this evening?
Eileen has her hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
I'm sorry I joined you late. Thank you for all your prayers for my twin sister Eloise. She has 20-year-old twins, Athena and Adam, and her husband Dave passed last Sunday. And someone sent me to my phone by Jamie Anderson, and then it says themindsjournal.com. Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All that unspent love gathers in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. So it was very comforting to me. So I wanted to share that with you. Thank you. And thanks for being a community for me. And thank you for everything.
And thank you for that. I knew the last line. Now I have a bigger context for it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Lovely.
There's love with nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm. Final thoughts.
On behalf of the community, Rabbi Steve, I would like to thank you for your talk this morning.
Yeah.
At the risk of making a bad pun, it was very illuminating.
Yeah, I don't know how one can be endarkenating.
It's more lighthearted this way.
Well, I thank you all for embracing a topic that I was curious about, wasn't sure whether we would really address it or not. So I appreciate that. As Rita pointed out, the darkness inside ourselves has to be recognized so that we can appreciate ourselves fully. Whatever we consider the darkness in the world around us also has to be embraced if we are going to create some kind of healing in the world, that the light and the dark are not enemies. They are just aspects that have to somehow be brought together into some kind of working element. So I wish you pleasant darkness.
I think with that, we're going to go ahead and halt the recording. Let's everybody wave to our friends on Facebook and streaming platforms. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, this is going to be recorded today and then posted later. But happy holidays to everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. For those of you who